Good evening. I did finish eating my hot food and I'm uploading. I like to go to bed. It's 7:30 p.m. soon. I like to go into my bed for real. So I need a minute to do my bed ready. Not a minute, but I need a little time to prepare my bed. Yes. So I start to get older soon, age 60. So it starts to get more tired more early.
Wolfenstein 3D. Wolfenstein 3D is a first-person shooter video game developed by ID Software and published by Apogee Software and FormGen. Originally released on the 5th of May 1992 for DOS, it was inspired by the 1981 Muse Software video game Castle Wolfenstein, and is the third installment in the Wolfenstein series. In Wolfenstein 3D, the player assumes the role of Allied spy William B.J. Blazkowicz during World War II as he escapes from the Nazi German prison Castle Wolfenstein and carries out a series of crucial missions against the Nazis. The player traverses each of the game's levels to find an elevator to the next level or kill a final boss, fighting Nazi soldiers, dogs, and other enemies with a knife and a variety of guns. Wolfenstein 3D was the second major independent release by ID Software, after the Commander Keen series of episodes. In mid-1991, programmer John Carmack experimented with making a fast 3D game engine by restricting the gameplay and viewpoint to a single plane, producing Hovertank 3D and Catacomb 3D as prototypes. After a design session prompted the company to shift from the family-friendly Keen to a more violent theme, programmer John Romero suggested remaking the 1981 stealth shooter Castle Wolfenstein as a fast-paced action game. He and designer Tom Hall designed the game, built on Carmack's engine, to be fast and violent, unlike other computer games on the market at the time. Wolfenstein 3D features artwork by Adrian Carmack and sound effects and music by Bobby Prince. The game was released through Apogee in 2 sets of 3 episodes under the shareware model, in which the first episode is released for free to drive interest in paying for the rest. An additional episode, Spear of Destiny, was released as a standalone retail title through FormGen. Wolfenstein 3D was a critical and commercial success and is considered one of the greatest video games ever made. It garnered numerous awards and sold over 250,000 copies by the end of 1995. It has been termed the grandfather of 3D shooters, and is widely regarded as having helped popularize the first-person shooter genre and establishing the standard of fast-paced action and technical prowess for many subsequent games in the genre, as well as showcasing the viability of the shareware publishing model at the time. FormGen developed an additional 2 episodes for the game, while Apogee released a pack of over 800 fan-created levels. ID Software never returned to the series, but did license the engine to numerous other titles before releasing the source code for free in 1995, and multiple other games in the Wolfenstein series have been developed by other companies since 2001. Gameplay, edit. In-game screenshot of the DOS version, showing the player character firing a submachine gun at guards. Wolfenstein 3D is a first-person shooter presented with rudimentary 3D graphics. The game is broken up into levels, each of which is a flat plane divided into areas and rooms by a grid-based pattern of walls and doors, all of equal height. Each level is themed after Nazi bunkers and buildings. To finish a level, the player must traverse through the area to reach an elevator. Levels, 10 in the original episodes, are grouped together into named episodes, with the final level focusing on a boss fight with a particularly difficult enemy. While traversing the levels, the player must fight Nazi guards and soldiers, dogs, and other enemies while managing supplies of ammunition and health. The player can find weapons and ammunition placed in the levels or can collect them from dead enemies. Weapons include a knife, a pistol, a submachine gun, and a rapid-fire chain gun. The player can also find keys that allow them to pass through locked doors. While the levels are presented in a 3D perspective, the enemies and objects are instead 2D sprites presented from several set viewing angles, a technique sometimes referred to as 2.5D graphics. The player's health is represented by a percentage starting at 100, which is diminished when they are shot or attacked by enemies. If the player's health falls to 0, they lose 1 life and start the level over with a knife, a pistol, and 8 bullets. The player begins each episode with 4 lives and can gain more by finding extra life tokens or by earning enough points. Points are scored by killing enemies or collecting treasures scattered throughout the levels. Points can also be scored by killing all enemies in a level, collecting all treasure, finding all secret areas, or completing a level under a part-time. The player's completion ratio and speed is displayed when a level is completed. Secret areas containing treasure, health refills, or ammunition can be found in hidden rooms revealed by activating certain wall tiles that slide back when triggered. The original version of the game allows the player to save their progress at any point, though in many of its ports the player can only save between levels. Plot, edit. Wolfenstein 3D is divided into 2 sets of 3 episodes, Escape from Castle Wolfenstein, Operation, Eisenfaust, and Die, Farah, Die, serve as the primary trilogy, with a second trilogy titled The Nocturnal Missions including A Dark Secret, Trail of the Madman, and Confrontation. The protagonist is William B.J. Blazkowicz, an American spy of Polish descent, and the game follows his efforts to destroy the Nazi regime. In Escape, Blazkowicz has been captured while trying to find the plans for Operation Eisenfaust, Iron Fist, and imprisoned in Castle Wolfenstein, from which he must escape. Operation Eisenfaust follows his discovery and thwarting of the Nazi plan to create an army of undead mutants in Castle Hollhammer, while in Die, Farah, Die, he infiltrates a bunker under the Reichstag, culminating in a battle with Adolf Hitler in a robotic suit equipped with 4 chain guns. The Nocturnal Missions form a prequel storyline dealing with German plans for chemical warfare. A Dark Secret deals with the initial pursuit through a weapons research facility of the scientist responsible for developing the weaponry. Trail of the Madman takes place in Castle Erlangen, where Blazkowicz's goal is to find the maps and plans for the chemical war. The story ends in Confrontation, which is set in Castle Offenbach as he confronts the Nazi general behind the chemical warfare initiative. Spear of Destiny, edit. An additional episode, titled Spear of Destiny, was released as a retail game by FormGen. It follows Blazkowicz on a different prequel mission, trying to recapture the Spear of Destiny from the Nazis after it was stolen from Versailles. FormGen later developed 2 sequel episodes, Return to Danger and Ultimate Challenge, each of which feature Blazkowicz as he fights through another Nazi base to recover the Spear of Destiny after it has been stolen again as part of a plot to build a nuclear weapon or summon demons. Development, edit. In October-December 1990, a team of employees from programming studio Softisk calling themselves Ideas from the Deep developed the three-part video game Commander Keen in Invasion of the Vorticons, the first game in the Commander Keen series. The group, who worked at Softisk in Shreveport, Louisiana, developing games for the Gamer's Edge video game subscription service and disc magazine, was composed of programmers John Romero and John Carmack, designer Tom Hall, artist Adrian Carmack, and manager Jay Wilbur. After the release of the game in December through shareware publisher Apogee Software, the team planned to quit Softisk and start their own company. When their boss, Softisk owner Al Vicovius, confronted them on both their plans and their use of company resources to develop the game, the team had created it on their work computers, both in the office after hours and by taking the computers to John Carmack's house on the weekends. The team made no secret of their intentions. After a few weeks of negotiation, the team agreed to produce a series of games for Gamer's Edge, one every 2 months. Ideas from the Deep, now formally established as ID Software, used some of these to prototype ideas for their own games. Adrian Carmack used them to push his preferred, dark art style, while John Carmack began to experiment with 3D computer graphics, which until then was largely the purview of flight simulation games such as Wing Commander, 1990, or Wireframe 3D in games on mainframe computers. Carmack found that this was largely due to the limitations of personal computers of the time, which had difficulty displaying a fast action game in 3D due to the number of surfaces it needed to calculate, but felt that the increasing computational power of PCs meant that it may be possible. During 1991, he experimented with limiting the possible surfaces the computer needed to display, creating game levels with walls designed only on a flat grid rather than with arbitrary shapes or angles. He also took the unusual approach of creating the displayed graphics through raycasting, in which only the surfaces visible to the player were calculated rather than the entire area surrounding the player. After 6 weeks of development, Carmack had created a rudimentary 3D game engine that used animated 2D sprites for enemies. ID Software then used the engine for the April 1991 Softisk game Hover Tank 3D, in which the player drives a tank through a plane of colored walls and shoots nuclear monsters. In the fall of 1991, after the team, Song Wilbur, had relocated to Madison, Wisconsin, and he had largely finished the engine work for Commander Keen in Goodbye, Galaxy, Carmack decided to implement a feature from Ultima Underworld, the Stygian Abyss, a role-playing game in development by Blue Sky Productions. Ultima Underworld was planned to display texture-mapped 3D graphics without Hover Tank's restrictions of flat walls and simple lighting. Deciding that he could add texture mapping without sacrificing the engine's speed or greatly increasing the system requirements as Underworld was doing, Carmack enhanced the engine over 6 weeks from Hover Tank 3D for another Softisk game, the November 1991 Catacomb 3D. Upon seeing it, Scott Miller of Apogee began to push the team to make a 3D shareware action game. John Romero in 2012. In November 1991, with the second Commander Keen trilogy of episodes nearing completion and their contractual obligations to Softisk almost finished, ID Software sat down to plan out their next major game. Designer Tom Hall, who initially wanted to do a third Keen trilogy, recognized that Carmack's programming focus had shifted from the 2D side-scrolling platform game series to 3D action games. After an initial proposal by Hall of a sci-fi project, It's Green and Pissed, Romero suggested a 3D remake of the 1981 Castle Wolfenstein. The team was interested in the idea, as Romero, Hall, and John Carmack all had fond memories of the original title and felt the maze-like shooter gameplay fit well with Carmack's 3D game engine, while Adrian Carmack was interested in moving away from the child-friendly art style of Keen into something more violent. Encouraged by the reception to his idea, Romero expounded on it by proposing a loud and cool fast action game where the player could shoot soldiers before dragging and looting their bodies. The core of the gameplay would be fast and simple, for Romero believed that due to the novelty of a 3D game and control scheme, players would not be receptive to more complicated, slow gameplay. He felt the game would occupy a unique place in the industry, which was then dominated by slower simulation and strategy games. Adrian and John Carmack were excited by the prospect, while Hall felt that it was enjoyable enough, and that since he was the company's designer that they could return to his ideas at a later date. Initially the team believed that they would be unable to use the Wolfenstein name due to trademark issues, and came up with multiple possible titles. They contacted Castle Wolfenstein developer Silas Warner, but learned that Muse Software had shut down in 1986, with all rights to Wolfenstein sold. The rights last belonged to someone in Michigan, and the team was able to purchase the trademark around mid-April 1992 for US $5,000. Thus they were free to use the name Wolfenstein 3D. The game concept met with immediate approval from Scott Miller of Apogee, who considered ID Software his star developer, and he guaranteed ID a US $100,000 payment on the project. Mark Rain, who had been brought on a few months prior as its probationary president, also sold the idea of doing a retail Wolfenstein project to FormGen, which had published its December 1991 Commander Keen in Aliens et My Babysitter, overcoming the publisher's concerns over Wolfenstein's proposed content. This put ID in the unique position of selling simultaneously to the shareware and retail markets. The project officially began on the 15th of December 1991. Romero and Hall designed the gameplay and aesthetics. Romero wanted the goal to be to mow down Nazis, with the suspense of storming a Nazi bunker full of SS soldiers and Hitler himself, as well as dogs, blood like you never see in games, and straightforward, lethal weapons. He also composed the general storyline for the game. Hall designed the levels while also adding collectible objects in the form of treasure and food for health items. He also did sketches for the bosses and the title screen. Carmack programmed the core of the game's engine in a month. He added a few features to the Wolfenstein 3D engine from Catacomb 3D, including support for doors and decorative non-wall objects, but primarily focused on making the game run smoother and faster with high-resolution graphics. The game was programmed chiefly in ANSI, with its scaling and raycasting routines written in assembly. The graphics for the game were planned to be in 16-color EGA, but were changed to 256-color VGA 4 months before release, which also enabled the game to have higher resolutions. Romero in turn worked on building a game with the engine, removing elements of the initial design, like looting enemy bodies, that he felt interrupted the flow of fast gameplay. The sprites for the enemies and objects were hand-drawn at 8 different angles by Adrian Carmack using Electronic Arts' Deluxe Paint 2. Initially the team had an external artist who assisted him and created animated wall textures, but the team felt that the quality was poor and did not use it in the game. The level design, by Romero and Hall, due to the grid-based level design, took some inspiration from Pac-Man, and paid homage with a hidden Pac-Man level. Romero later said in 2017 that making the levels was uninteresting compared to those from Commander Keen and had to prompt Hall to finish the maps with the promise of being able to buy himself a brand new car. The team was going to include some anti-fascist references and Nazi atrocities, but left them out to avoid controversies. They ensured that the presentation of the game created the atmosphere that they wanted, adding violent animations by Adrian Carmack for enemies being shot and music and sound effects by keen composer Bobby Prince to make the guns sound exciting. Prince took some inspiration from his days as a platoon soldier in the US Army. With the aid of a 16-bit sampler keyboard and cassette recorder, he composed realistic sounds from a shooting range in addition to Foley sounds. The development team along with Scott Miller did the voicing for the enemies. Some of the enemy shouts were based on the original Castle Wolfenstein game. As development continued, ID Software hired their former Softdisk liaison Kevin Cloud as an assistant artist, and moved the company out to Mesquite, Texas, near where Apogee was located. Scott Miller of Apogee was pleased to have his star developers nearby, and agreed to not only increase their royalty rate to 50%, but have Apogee create their next game for Softdisk, Scuba Venture, so that ID could focus on Wolfenstein. The game was intended to be released using Apogee's shareware model of splitting it into 3 episodes and releasing the first for free, with 10 levels per episode. The level maps were designed in 2D using a custom-made program called Tile Editor, TED, which had been used for the entire Keen series as well as several other games. Upon finding out that the team was able to create a level in a single day using the program, Miller convinced them to instead develop 6 episodes, which could be sold in different sized packs. Around the same time, the team changed members and structure. ID fired probationary President Mark Rain and brought back Jay Wilbur, who had stayed in Shreveport, to be both their CEO and business team. Bobby Prince moved into the office temporarily to record sound effects, while Adrian Carmack moved out of the office to get away from the noise. As the game neared completion, FormGen contacted ID with concerns over its violence and shock content. In response, ID increased these aspects. Adrian Carmack added skeletons, corpses, and bloody war details, and Hall and Romero added screams and cries in German, along with a death cam that would show a replay of the death of the final boss of an episode. The team also added Horst Wessel-Lied, the anthem of the Nazi Party, to the opening screen. John Carmack, meanwhile, added in walls that moved when triggered to hide secret areas, a feature that Hall had been pushing for months but which Carmack had objected to for technical reasons. Hall also added in cheat codes, and wrote a backstory for the game. The team did a month of playtesting in the final stage of the game's development. In the early morning of the 5th of May, 1992, the first episode of the shareware game was completed and uploaded by Apogee and ID to bulletin board systems. The other episodes were completed a few weeks later. The total development time had been around half a year, with a cost of around US $25,000 to cover the team's rent and US $750 per month salaries, plus around US $6,500 for the computer John Carmack used to develop the engine and the US $5,000 to get the Wolfenstein trademark. The following summer, most of the ID Software team developed Spear of Destiny. The single-episode game was a prequel to Wolfenstein 3D and used the same engine, but added new audio, graphics, and enemies. It was created in 2 months, and was published commercially by FormGen in September 1992. The publisher was concerned that the material would be controversial due to holy relics associated with World War II, but Romero felt it was similar to the Indiana Jones films. Instead of working on the game, John Carmack experimented with a new graphics engine that was licensed for Shadowcaster and became the basis of the engine for its next game, Doom, 1993. Release, edit. The first episode was released as shareware for free distribution by Apogee, and the whole original trilogy of episodes made available for purchase on May the 5th as Wolfenstein 3D, though the purchased episodes were not actually shipped to customers until a few weeks later. The second trilogy that Miller had convinced ID to create was released soon after as an add-on pack titled The Nocturnal Missions. Players were able to buy each trilogy separately or as a single game. In 1993, Apogee also published the Wolfenstein 3D Super Upgrades Pack, which included 815 fan-made levels called Wolfmaster, along with a map editor titled Map Edit and a random level generator named Wolf Creator. A retail Wolfenstein episode double the length of the Apogee episodes, Spear of Destiny, was released through FormGen on the 18th of September, 1992. FormGen later published 2 mission packs titled Return to Danger and Ultimate Challenge, each the same length as Spear of Destiny, in May 1994, and later that year published Spear of Destiny and the 2 mission packs together as the Spear of Destiny Super CD package. ID released the original 6 Apogee episodes as a retail title through GT Software in 1993 and produced a collection of both the Apogee and FormGen episodes released through Activision in 1998. There were 2 intended promotions associated with the original Apogee release, both of which were cancelled. A pushable wall maze led to a sign reading Call Apogee and Say Aardwolf, snippety in beta versions. It was intended that the first person to find the sign and carry out its instructions would win a prize, consisting of $1,000 or a line of Apogee games for life, but the quick creation of level editors and cheat programs for the game soon after release led ID and Apogee to give up on the idea. Additionally, after completing an episode, the player is given a 3-letter code in addition to their total score and time. This code was intended to be a verification code as part of a high-score contest, but the sudden prevalence of editor programs resulted in the cancellation of the contest without ever being formally announced. Imaginer bought the rights for the game, and commissioned ID to port the game to the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, SNES, for $100,000 advance. The team was busy with the development of Doom, plus their work on Spear of Destiny, and ignored the project for 7 or 8 months, finally hiring Rebecca Heinemann to do the work. She made no progress on the port, however, and the ID team members instead spent 3 weeks frantically learning how to make SNES games and creating the port by March 1993. This version was written in C and compiled in the 65816 assembly language, making use of binary space partitioning rather than raycasting in order to give it speed. Carmack had to resize existing images to fit the SNES resolution. Nintendo insisted on censoring the game in accordance with their policies. This included first making all blood green and then finally removing Nazi imagery and German voice clips, and replacing enemy dogs with giant rats. The port was released in Japan on the 10th of February 1994, under the name Wolfenstein 3D, The Claw of Eisenfaust, before being released in North America and Europe later that year. Using the source code of the SNES port, on a whim John Carmack later converted the game to run on the Atari Jaguar. Atari Corporation approved the conversion for publication, and Carmack spent 3 weeks, assisted by Dave Taylor, improving the port's graphics and quality to what he later claimed was 4 times more detail than the DOS version. He also removed the changes that Nintendo had insisted on. The game itself, however, had to be slowed down to work properly on the console. Wolfenstein 3D has also been ported to numerous other platforms. In 1993, Alternate Worlds Technology licensed Wolfenstein 3D and converted it into a virtual reality arcade game. The 1994 Acorn Archimedes port was done in UK by programmer Eddie Edwards and published by Powerslave Software. By 1994, a port for the Sega Mega Drive was under development by Imaginer, who intended to release it by September, but it was cancelled due to technical problems. The 1994 classic Mac OS version of the game had 3 releases. The first Encounter, a shareware release, the second Encounter, with 30 exclusive levels, and the third Encounter, with all 60 levels from the DOS version. An Atari Lynx version of the game was offered earlier by Atari for ID, but work on the port was never started, save for a few images. A 3-do version was released